Well, thank you for being with us again. We're welcome, all of you, wherever you are. We know some of you may watch it at the regular posted time. Some of you may go online and just go to LLBN and just watch the archive. So everywhere I go, I'll see people, and they'll say, hey, we see you on LLBN. So we're thankful. And obviously it doesn't do much good if no one's out there following along with us. So get a Bible, and we're in Revelation 6. And if you're new to us, this is Dr. Paulien from the School of Religion here in Loma, down the street. Pastor Sara Colon at our church, youth pastor at Garden Grove. I'm Dan Smith. And we just want to put the website right on at front in case we forget about it later. So if you can mark it down, we'd love to get an email and have you dialogue with us, and we'll try to answer. If we're not getting it quite right and you say, I think you missed this, we're glad to be educated from our listeners around the world. So our email is GPS, God's Prophetic Surprise, GPS at LLBN.TV. So it's up on the screen. Mark it down. We'd love to get an email, and we pass them around, and then we try to answer that and the next time we tape. So here we are, Revelation 6. Get a Bible and join us. To summarize, in case you didn't hear everything the last time, we spent really the whole show wrestling with the issue, is this first horseman, the first horse of the seven seals, is it positive, meaning it's referring to Christ as the conquering Savior, the conqueror on the white horse, and in the purity of the gospel went all over the world in the first century, the world that they knew of at that time. And then the second, third, and fourth horsemen are a response to the gospel. Or other commentators go the other direction and say, no, these four are together, they're all evil. Death and war and famine and conquering is negative, not positive. And here God is allowing evil to go, and the four winds are being let go, and evil occurs. And this is one of the four evil. And good people and smart people and good commentaries are on both sides of this. And both have great arguments. John basically went over it last time, but they just referred to them. Looking at the word for conqueror is used positively, not every time, but most of the time, and all the time before chapter 6. Right? Am I saying that right? Mm-hmm. Every time before chapter 6, the word for conquer is overcome or triumph, all positive. 11
That's
times.
in Revelation only, though, right? Or is that throughout? Every time.
I think, yeah, no, Revelation in particular, this word conquering is associated with the people of God and the positive thing. Now, the two exceptions, one is in chapter 13, where the beast from the sea conquers the saints and persecutes them. So that's a persecution language. In chapter 11, I believe it is, the beast that comes up out of the abyss conquers the two witnesses. Okay. So you have two occasions, but in each of those, it's very clear the bad guys are using the good word. So that there's no question to the reader whose side in the narrative they are on. And the purpose for the book of Revelation is to be clear on where the deception is, so that readers who are out in the world where things aren't always clear can find solid ground in the scriptures. If in the scriptures you're not sure whether this is deception or not, that would be, I think, a horrible thing.
That's the purpose of the scripture, is to reveal.
Is to clarify, to reveal that which we need to know in order to, to survive life in general and the end time in particular.
He says, I'm the light of the world, so that you will know I have come. I've told you to reveal.
Yeah.
And the other argument was that the white is every other time in Revelation was positive.
Yeah, it's never negative.
White horse, white robes, white, okay. So powerful arguments, and don't we want it to be that Christ is the one who is present participle, you brought up, always conquering and will conquer in the end. We don't want Satan to be the one
who conquers,
always conquering until the end. So good arguments, and we're hopeful that you will make your decision. And we'll always hold it a little tentatively for later research and later ideas that may tilt us one way or the other. Today, now we go to the second horse. So Revelation chapter 6.
Before you do that.
Oh, you want to do something first?
Yeah, before you do that, I'm interested in Sarah's perspective.
Oh, yes, we must hear.
On the fact that, here's two of her mentors. I'm Uncle John and you're Uncle Dan, I guess. But anyway, not as close as I am, but it's all right.
You stuck with me on the daily. You've had me all life. So, I mean, I don't know which one of you is more messed up.
Yeah, that's right. But I'm interested in Sarah's perspective and also representing, the crowd, the younger generation, the previous generation. When you see two of us having a conversation like this on the white horse, what goes through your head?
Well, it helps me a little bit in one sense because I did study some theology, not as much as some, but it helps me realize that there's always more to keep studying out and that there's no, this is the only answer, and that actually brings me some kind of hope because I think so often we use definitives as here, this is the answer, this is law, this is what you're supposed to believe, and if you have any question about it, you kind of get thrown under the bus in the sense of saying oh, you're not holier enough, or you're not Adventist enough, or whatever it may be. Mm-hmm. But the other thing is I think it's also kind of frustrating because I also want some kind of clear answer at the same time to be oh, this is what we stand for, this is the interpretation. And you said that in the Bible there's not going to be any misleading, right, when it comes to good and evil.
In the narrative.
Right.
Yeah, how you apply the Bible can be challenging.
This is true. Mm-hmm. But so in the narrative, it's not supposed to be misleading. And so then what do you do with a verse that is completely subjective, I guess, to interpretations of different aspects of the same narrative? And so I guess for that kind of stresses me out a little bit because I don't know.
And could we say that we don't need this passage to prove either side? We don't need this passage to know that there's a war. We don't need this passage to know that Christ is a conquering king, King of Kings. We don't need this passage to know that there's an evil side that is fighting against Christ. So we don't have to have a final decision on this passage on either of those issues. Am I saying that correctly?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Well, but then that is my other question. Then what's the significance of this moment, this scene? How does this affect us now, and how does this affect the bigger story at large? How does any of this matter? Or are we just sitting here talking for 3 episodes on something that's not actually consequential to anyone or anything?
Definitely, you got to go deep here. There's no question about it. And I think that's a positive, that if God is who he is, there's going to be things we don't understand. If you've understood God, you're not talking about the real God. You're talking about some made-up God.
Great point,
it's not
John.
quite
Great
there.
point.
The key things, let's just take for granted, for the moment, that the 4 horsemen represent the gospel going out into the world and various stages of acceptance and rejection of that gospel. If that's the story here, what does this add? What does it add to what we would have already learned from Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John?
There's going to be reaction to the gospel?
Well, this gospel story here is grounded in what? Chapter 5.
Chapter 5, the cosmic throne room.
This going forth of the gospel is the outflow of breaking the seals. Mm-hmm. What's this breaking the seals all about? It's that cosmic conflict. It's God's solution to the problem that there's people out there that doubt him and question him and so on. The gospel is now set in the context of a much bigger battle. This is setting the stage for chapter 12, where that's spelled out in more detail. So I think if you take it the way that I'm beginning to outline here, in one sense, it's not saying anything different than what you've heard before. Mm-hmm. But in another sense, it's clarifying what you don't get in the Gospel of John, you don't get in Matthew, Mark, and Luke. And that's the clear sense that the little decisions we make every day, the little battles we fight every day, are really important. They're part of a much bigger battle. Mm-hmm. And for me, that's important because there are days when I feel like, does my life even matter? At 4:30 in the morning, I wake up a little too soon. I'm just saying, nothing's going right. I'm not doing any good.
Well,
nobody cares.
And go back to bed.
It'll
be better
I know.
It
helps. Get in the shower. Life looks better. But the point is, when you have those moments, and I suspect if I have them, other people do, because some of them show it on their face, as they go through the day. So if we all have that struggle, it's important to know this really matters. When a mother is struggling, am I going to get up and feed this kid? I'm so tired, I'm so sleepy. That effort, that action has universal consequences. It's part of a much
Why
bigger
do you think
picture.
Jesus didn't make it as clear as now it is in Revelation? There's hints of it all through the Gospels. What is your hypothesis on that?
Well, in the Gospel of John, written by the same author, I suspect, you have very much the same perspective as Matthew, Mark, and Luke on this question. There's a hint or two of the cosmic conflict in the Gospel of John. You've got Jesus saying, I saw Satan
Fall like lightning from heaven.
now is the kingdom of this world, now the prince of this world is being judged. There's a hint there. In chapter 8, he talks about, Satan's been a liar from the beginning and a murderer and so on. So you have touches of cosmic conflict. If you didn't have revelation, though, you probably would just think of those as localized incidents.
Well, and I was going to say, for me, the Gospels, what's so significant about them, because in a lot of senses, I think I tend to focus on the more practical theology. That's where my heart tends to lean, not on the exegetical, which is a flaw to some extent. I understand this. But for me, Jesus was going through trying to kind of break down the barriers that the church and people had made. And so I think he was so hyper-focused on that, he needed to spend the energy kind of like, this is not a rule that we need to be applying right now. You don't need to be in a physical structure. You know, like synagogues are not the only place I dwell. These people, like he kept kind of knocking those things over. So maybe his descriptions weren't needing to go cosmic, if you will. Because if so, then that would almost confuse the masses more. That's a huge leap to go from like in this building to just the street right outside the building. So to go straight to cosmic, that would be, I feel,
that makes a ton of sense to me. The purpose of the Gospels is to see God at work in a specific situation, a specific time and place. And saying a whole lot about the cosmic conflict would probably only confuse matters.
Yeah.
They needed to somehow grasp that in Jesus, God was interacting with them really personally, really directly. They needed to know that, and so the Gospels are there for that. But now comes Revelation. At the climax of everything else, now Jesus says, I think you're ready for something more. I think you're ready for me to draw the curtain back and show you something that you never saw before. And so these horsemen replay Matthew 24. And in replaying Matthew 24, they're setting it in a cosmic context that wasn't quite so clear in Matthew.
So when Jesus is casting out demons and the disciples come back and said, we have authority over these demons, there's hints of it all, but Revelation takes it now to the fullest side.
But you could do the whole demonic thing locally. There's these local troublemakers, ghostly pests, and you deal with them by invoking the name of Jesus, and then they go away. They get banished to the pigs or wherever else, down in the bottom of the Sea of Galilee or whatever. So it's still in a localized context. To see that cosmically is not obvious in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and John.
Good. Go one more step further with this, John, just for fun. We came back from Manila 6 weeks ago, whenever it was. And the last day at the crusade, we're at a stadium. Sarah was in the middle of this. And I am preaching with the translator to 7,000 people in a stadium. and someone came and changed the batteries for the remote presenter just before we went out to preach, tested it out. It worked for the first, 5 minutes of the sermon, and it just quit. I mean, just quit. Sarah steps out from the back of the stage, because I'm preaching. I try to keep going. She's in there rebooting the computer, and then we go and the remote just doesn't work. There's no reason.
To clarify, the computer crashed and the remote broke simultaneously.
Yeah.
In front of 7,000 people. Not every other night, not when we're in front of 20, not in our back room, in front of 7,000 people. When we had just done it right, it worked 5 minutes ago, it didn't work now. And our answer was, there's an enemy, somewhere. And you could say it's only electronics and it's just a sheer matter of electrons and natural physics. Is there a place for the demons to say, no, we're in a battle, and we don't want to hear the gospel smoothly, and we're going to do what we can to fight? Or is there the role of the demonic still in the world today.
You absolutely see that in the ministry of Jesus. There was constant resistance, constant getting in the way. And the important part of Revelation, though, is to make clear that that's part of a much bigger picture.
But we all play with this out in our minds and in our lives. We're having this battle in our brains.
Absolutely.
Is it happening in our world, in our churches, and our families? And we just have to understand we're up against a powerful force that is brilliant, that has never slept in thousands of years, and is still in the game.
When we get to chapter 12, we're going to discover that the battle in heaven, and he uses military language, the battle in heaven is a war of words. When we get to the battle of Armageddon, we're going to discover that the battle of Armageddon is a battle for the mind, for whose allegiance you're going to give. So the book of Revelation, all the way through, is concerned less about the politics and the give and flow of nations on this earth than it is about whether those who read the book are going to have their allegiance on the right side. And from that perspective, I think the gospel orientation of the first horse is I think, very helpful.
Go one more step, just for people who out there may be intrigued about this right now. If you are rooted in Jesus and are filling your devotional time with Jesus, can you shield yourself from this, from the attacks of demons and Satan? Or are we vulnerable, no matter how Christian you are, that demons can still come after you and try to disrupt you, your family, your life?
Well, those who have studied the demonic fairly deeply suggest a difference between oppression and possession. To be possessed of demons is something only for somebody who has given up their connection with God. But oppressed, troubled, like your lights going off and all that kind of stuff, that can happen anytime. God will sometimes prevent it from happening, but not always. So are we protected from Satan? I would say the biblical answer again is yes and no. Yes, in the sense that God will not allow Satan to do that which would totally disrupt your life, his plan, etc. But at the same time, to be troubled by it. Jesus was troubled by it. The life of Jesus is evident. He was never conquered by Satan, but he sure was troubled and bugged by Satan. Gethsemane, the wilderness, etc. So that tells us.
And I think I've kind of struggled with this. I've seen some weird things happen. I'm a missionary kid. I think I've been exposed to some pretty strange things that are unexplainable, and so I give it that. But I also struggle, I think, with the concept of like every little thing that goes wrong in my day is an act of terrorism from Satan.
So that goes too far to go there.
That drives me a little bit insane when so for example, my car got towed the other day. And my permit was there, it just shifted a little bit, and so it's still visible, it got towed. So some people were like, Satan's against you, he didn't want you to get to your day. And I was like,
that's right.
Honestly, today was not really a day that was super consequential in Satan attacking me. It was inconvenient. I was 20 minutes late to my meeting.
When we have to own our own responsibilities. If we were slothful, we didn't study, and we didn't do well.
And if we didn't maintain the car and stuff like that.
I just, those kinds of things, it was really inconveniencing, and it was an upsetting moment in my day, and it took a long time, and all this stuff. And it did ruin aspects of my day, but I don't personally feel like Satan was like, today's the day I will destroy her.
So there's a happy medium somewhere. We don't see a witch or a demon behind every bush, is the old line.
And I think that we need to be careful with that, because I think we've trained people to almost think that everything, if they slip in their shower or they stub their toe on their way out the door and have to put a Band-Aid on.
There's no responsibility and cause and effect.
I think we automatically we give almost too much power to that thought process, when in reality, I personally don't believe that that's like.
But there seem to be times when the demonic is in the game.
People have sometimes asked if Satan died tomorrow, would it matter? And I'd say probably not at first. We're all messed up enough that things probably wouldn't look much different for at least a week or two, for sure. So I think we're quite capable of replacing him, even with our own.
So we have an appropriate respect, but we're not going to give him
definitely appropriate respect. And I've had engagements like you have, and I remember one time a woman with long fingernails just grabbing my arm and digging in. And at that moment, there were 6 people praying, and I just felt lifted up by the Spirit, and I just was absolutely certain she can't hurt me. And she never did. It was always to the point of, but never got so far, and then to see God intervene and transform a life, it was amazing.
So hard to know. We had a guy try to take over the worship service Sabbath and start singing. Was he singing, right? As I walked onto the stage, he began to sing a song right in front of church. And somebody had to help usher him. I've had people take over the church service when I was preaching in North Carolina. I had a guy in Jamaica start preaching at the same time. I'm preaching here, and he's preaching at the same time. You know, what's trying? There's a demons out here trying to do something, or just some crazy people are around. You know.
Yeah, the guy that just said, the guy that said, that's a great hymn. Let's just join in, see what happens.
Anyway, let's come back to our text now. We've got a few minutes left in our.
Let's do the red horse.
Revelation chapter 6, starting with verse 3. When the Lamb opened the second seal, I heard the second living creature say, "Come." Then another horse came out, a fiery red one. Its reader was given power to take peace from the earth and to make men slay each other. To him was given a large sword. So usually this is labeled war as the second horseman.
Yeah.
What should we do to dig something out of this passage, or what do we need to discuss?
Well, you notice that this horse went out just like the first one. And something that will strike us a little bit later on in these studies, the white horse and the red horse go out, but the black horse and the pale horse don't.
They're just there.
Yeah, they're just there. So it seems like these are pairs. The white horse and the red horse are a pair. The white horse would represent the going forth of the gospel, people accepting the gospel. The red horse would be opposition to the gospel, and we'll show that from parallel texts in just a moment. So these two seem like a pair, and then 3 and 4 are also a pair. They don't go out, which is the really disastrous ones don't go out. So they're just shown. They just appear, but they don't actually go out and do all that. In chapter 7, that's where the final release will be catastrophic of all of this. So first of all, this horse goes out like the white horse, and it says is granted to him. Well, first of all, what kind of red is this?
Bright.
Bright red, huh?
Mine says fiery.
Fiery red. See, there's 2 types of red. You have the crimson red, which is marked like your crayon, and then you have fiery red. This is puros. It's the word for fire. It's a fiery horse. It doesn't even say red. It just says a fiery horse. But that is a red word, but it's sort of more of an orange color side of the red. So it isn't red in the sense of bloodshed, necessarily. So it's
like an element more than a color.
Yeah, yeah. So it's a fiery horse, but the red isn't. I mean, the translator's not off on that. It's just a deeper dimension to that type of red. And this fiery horse went out, and he was granted to take peace from the earth. Is peace military peace, or is it spiritual peace? The only other place where peace is mentioned in the book is in chapter 1, and there it's spiritual peace. It's the blessing. You know, grace and peace to you and the 7 churches. So the only context for this peace here is a spiritual one. So is this war, is the riding of this horse conflicts breaking out all over the world?
I think it's interesting, and I'm sure there's something way more intelligent that you could say about this, and I'm going to mess it up. But in this verse, I find it interesting that it says so that the people should slay one another. So it's not even taking responsibility for it, whereas in the first horse, it's the one conquering. It's going to be the one doing the thing. This one's just kind of creating mayhem and not actually doing anything.
Oh, great observation. Great observation.
So.
That it's causing them to slay one another. This is something you saw often in the Old Testament, where God would cause, and in the comic books.
In all of the comic books.
Yeah, okay, well, you can enlighten us on that in a moment. But in the Old Testament, often God intervenes by having the enemies start fighting each other.
Chronicles 20, Jehoshaphat.
Yeah, Jehoshaphat battle there. So that's very interesting that the peace here seems to be the peace of the gospel, and you have the language of slaying one another, the language of division. Mm-hmm. Does the gospel divide? Is that a motif in Jesus' ministry?
Jesus said so.
He said so. He says, I've come to do what? Let's see, what is the text there? I fear I don't have it right before me.
I don't know.
Well, 2 Corinthians 2. Oh, here, Luke 12. I'm sorry to mess it up there. We're Luke 12, 51 to 53. Luke 12, 51 to 53, New American Standard. Do you suppose that I came to grant peace on the earth? I tell you no, but rather division. For from now on, 5 members in one household will be divided, 3 against 2 and 2 against 3. They'll be divided, father against son, son against father, mother against daughter, daughter against mother, mother-in-law against daughter-in-law, daughter-in-law against mother-in-law. All right? Jesus is saying, you know, we like to think the gospel, oh, this wonderful peace that comes with the gospel, but the gospel can take peace from the earth as well. The Red Rider takes peace from the earth. The gospel comes to divide. In what sense does the gospel divide, Dan? You preach about this a lot.
You have to respond one way or the other.
Yeah, it calls on people to respond. And when the gospel is presented, people can't stay neutral, because the message of the gospel is that something happened at the cross that affects every human being. And when you hear that message, you're either drawn closer to him or you're driven further away.
Is it similar to the book that starts sweet and turns bitter?
Perhaps.
2 different reactions to the gospel?
Yeah, yeah. You were going to say something?
I probably shouldn't, but
that means we got to hear it now.
I'm wondering how this...
Just remember, we got about a minute.
I know, but that's why I was like, probably shouldn't. The concept then of unity is difficult then, because peace isn't even a unifying thing within the gospel. And so if that's not the case, then we're going to have varying views no matter what. And so how does unity play into peace and into our theology and message and all of that? And so, like, I don't know, that's now very
But the focus
difficult.
here is related to the gospel. It brings division between those who accept it and those who reject it.
So
you're talking about the divisions among those who have accepted the gospel. And
yeah.
in a way, we still have struggled with that too.
Okay.
But this is focusing on when the gospel is preached, it results in all those who listen ending up on different sides of a fence. What the gospel does is get people off the fence, getting committed to one side or to another.
So you're either accepting or rejecting.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So I'm not certain about this, but I actually could see Christ as the rider on the red horse as well, because it's showing the 2 sides of the gospel. That the gospel goes out, and with one group of people, it has this incredible success. With another group of people, flat out rejection. And so that would bring this text right into the heart of the gospel. And by the way, real quick, the sword here is a machaira, which is a sacrificial sword, the kind they used in the sanctuary. So there's sacrificial language here, there's division language here, and possibly also persecution.
Too much, too good. We got to go. They're all waving at me here. We're going. We got to be done. Oh, we love Revelation. I hope you'll pick that up from our group here. We love what Dr. Jon is able to bring to us. So be with us next week, and we'll continue to go with the 4 horsemen, Revelation 6.